Alright, so last week I was at YCS London. I bubbled the event going 9-3, and the deck that I chose to play was Tearlament. I do think there's a lot to talk about with this specific deck. The deck might be more relevant in the future again, so if you want to try it at locals, even now I think it's a very solid pick. In this video I will talk about why I chose to play the deck for this specific event, and it's not only because I like Tearlament. I had some reasons behind it. Why I chose to play certain cards over others, and which engines I also considered to play, but did not end up playing. I also posted the deck list in the Tearlament Facebook group already and on my Twitter, so if you want to check that out, the comment section, there's a bit of discussion there as well. So let's look at the deck list and talk a little bit about it. Now, this is the final iteration of the deck that I came up with after about 3 weeks of testing. Maybe this deck went through 10 to 12 iterations. So quite a lot. I wanted a decent matchup versus Kashtira, but I still wanted to keep the main essential idea of the deck, that it is a very, very good deck into every other deck, right? So every other matchup than Kashtira should be at least a 65 to 70% win rate in the first game, and ideally post-siding if you go second as well. Obviously the question is, why should you play Tearlament in a format where Kashtira is expected to be the most popular deck, and frankly also probably the strongest deck? I was more of the opinion that first of all you should play a deck that you're comfortable with, that you feel confident with during the event, that even after 7 or 8 rounds when you get tired, you can still play it without making a lot of mistakes. I do feel like at big events like YCS's, people make mistakes because they get stressed out, they're under a lot of pressure. And if you're not very familiar with your deck, you're going to end up doing the same, and you don't want to be that guy, right? You just want to be able to play your deck as best as you can, and don't do like silly mistakes because of your own cards. And Tearlament was a deck that I was very familiar with, so that's why I chose to play it. I also thought that you want to play a deck that, like I said, is very good into the variety of decks that are in the format. I was expecting maybe 25% to 30% Kashtira, which there only ended up being 19%, which ended up being even better for me than my prediction. I ended up playing versus 7 Kashtira out of 11 rounds, which was very unlucky. But I think if I had had a luckier tournament run in terms of matchups, I think it could have been, or it could have went a lot better. I won all my matchups that were non-Kashtira, and I lost the 3 matches where I went second, losing the die roll, and all of them involved Shifter in some game. So, and I didn't have the Gamma for it, so that was a bit unfortunate, but that's how it is. You know, that's the sacrifice or the risk that I took. And I think I would play the list again if I had to enter the tournament again. I chose to play Tearlament because I thought it was going to be the most explosive deck in the format. If you start milling, you just start going crazy. You start making fusions, and it can break every board going second, at least in theory, if you draw the right hand. Now, we all know that Tearlament right now is a bit more luck-based than it was in the past, but that's where deck building comes into place, and that's also what I found interesting over the last 3 weeks, just trying to figure out how to build this freaking deck. It's so hard now. You want to have a good balance between good cards to mill, but also decent cards to draw, right? You don't want to play cards that if you mill them, they're really good, but if you draw them, they're like super terrible. Cards like Jet Synchron, for example, is a very good mill but a terrible draw, or what I also considered was Tackle Crusader into some matchups is also a very good mill, but it's just so bad to draw. Even though you can maybe discard it with Sheeran, but it's just not good enough. So I think I found a good balance between cards that are good mills but also decent draws. So all of the Tearlament cards check that box, and that's why I first of all think that you should definitely try to max them out as much as possible. I've seen a lot of people cut Rhino Heart to 1, which I don't understand, because this is a very good mill if you play enough Tearlament cards in your deck, and it's also a good draw, honestly. Like, milling 2 cards off the tier cache, if you mill it, is decent, and if you mill a name, if you can mill a name because you have access to some fusion play, it's obviously still a very good card because it's a level 4, it makes Redoer, which is a interruption on your opponent's turn again if you have a Tearlament card in hand, so I really like that at 3. Tier Cache is the best card in the deck, hands down. Makes you play on your opponent's turn, and also plays around cards like Book of Eclipse or Evenly Matched. You can still keep the meta noise versus Kashtira and still have a name then on board in the main phase too, so I like this card overall very much, especially in terms of the interactions it gives you with other decks. Also, if they give you the Expulsion lock, the Gimmick Puppet, this plays on your opponent's turn, so I never lose to the Gimmick Puppet lock. I think all my branded matchups, I didn't play any at YCS, but in my testing I barely lost to the branded matchup because they Gimmick Puppet lock you and you just start playing on their turn again, and yeah, it's just randomly so good versus branded. And then 3 Tearlament Scream. This card is amazing. Like mill 3 on every turn, and then you add a trap. So it basically does everything that you want for the deck, right? You want it gets you more explosive plays. It interacts with your opponent, right? So you can run over their stuff if you go second. It is a lot of pressure if you activate it going second. Like they sometimes have to force, it forces a carrot, it forces some negation of some form or some interruption. But then if they get rid of it from the field, you even search another trap which gives you more discards for your dangers. King of the Swamp is also non-negotiable, as well as Foolish Burial and the Millers. These are just standard cards, Terraforming of course as well. And Polymerization is a card that I've seen some people cut, but Guardian Chimera is too strong in certain matchups. What is more interesting is the other part of the deck, right? Gamma, Nessies, Mothmans, Malicious, D-Hero Denier, the Shuffler, and the Kashtira engine with Trivic Hammer. So I would like to focus first on the Kashtira engine, since a lot of people are playing this at the moment in their Tearlament decks, and I want to talk about why I dislike this engine quite a lot, but I still ended up playing it anyway. So I don't like the engine because what I've seen a lot of people do is if you summon Kashtira Fenrir, you can search Tearcash. If you have any other access to another Tearlament card, you can summon Dracosac, summon Cherubini with the 2 tokens, and then link those 2 off into Sprite Sprint, dumping the Merly, making a random, you mill the King of the Swamp with the Cherubini, and then you make a random Grapha or Rule Clause. Now, the issue I see with that is that it doesn't really extend your game state, so I would sometimes rather just keep a Kashtira Fenrir on the field, to be honest, because if you keep the Fenrir on the field, it's versus some decks, it's a better interruption than the Rule Clause or the Grapha that you make randomly. But what I found in testing is that you can actually dump the D-Hero Denier instead of the King of the Swamp to then make with the Merly and the Denier the D-Hero Dangerous. Now, D-Hero Dangerous, quick effect, you can discard a card and send a D-Hero from deck to grave. So you send the Mally, you special summon the Mally and make Beatrice. Beatrice is hands down the best card in Tearlaments that you can play right now, but I didn't find a way to make it consistently before. Of course, you can make a Roar with Nessie and a Tearlament, but it's not really that consistent to get another level 6 on the board with Bestials maybe, but it's kind of iffy. But with this deck, now, with this version, you have a consistent way to get the Beatrice. Now, Beatrice does so much because it gives you a lot of variety that you usually don't have, right? You can afford to only play one Miller because you can consistently mill it with Beatrice if you need it in a certain matchup when you go first, such as maybe a Runic matchup, or it also gives you protection versus evenly plus a bait. So for example, if your opponent plays Flashing Fire, Freezing Curse's Tip plus evenly match, which was a very common combination and was a combination that I expected going into the weekend, with Beatrice and Grapha on the field, and maybe a Redoer or a Shuffler in the graveyard with a Kaleido Heart and the field spell on the field, you can actually make a Dragostapelia. If they negate the Grapha, you make a Dragostapelia with the Grapha and any name that you trigger, and then you trigger another name in the battle phase and make another Grapha. So you have double Grapha access that way. And that only goes through Beatrice, right? Beatrice can also, mill a Miller, or it can also mill Trivikama, which that is also very important because the field spell is one of the most integral parts of the deck. As long as you have the field spell up, your deck can play. And if you don't have it up, like, everything becomes a bit awkward. You have less interruption, and Pelorino is just a very, very good card. So you want to have access to that. That's why I chose to play the Kashtira engine still. Now, Fenrir, to be honest, it wasn't even that great of a card during the tournament, because if you think about it, Tearlament is not a deck that is very prone to removal, right? So cards like a Fenrir on your opponent's field, or maybe, I don't know, a card like Flashing Fire, they're usually very bad versus your deck if you go second. But suddenly if you put Fenrir in your deck, you become very vulnerable to those cards, which is something that I didn't want to do. But what I found is that, in some scenarios, it fits both roles. It gives you more consistency, but also a good card going second. That is the obvious argument, of course. But I thought with the D-Hero line, I thought it gives me enough of a strong play that it becomes more attractive again. Because only with the Graph or Rule Colors play, I didn't like it at all. What I also don't like about these cards is that they're not good mills. Like I said, I want to play a very explosive deck that if I get to mill, I know that I will gain a lot of advantage. So these cards don't really fulfill that purpose. Then the D-Hero engine, I want to talk about this. So during testing, I tried a lot of different sort of engines and mills and things that you can play. But the D-Heroes just seemed, they just checked all the boxes. they are good mills in an individual sense. So if you mill them alone without any Tearlament name, they're good. But if you mill them with a Tearlament name, it becomes even better because you can make D-Hero dangerous, which then gives you access to Beatrice always. So they're like King of the Swamps in a way, where if you mill them with the Tearlament, then they become extremely strong. But also Malicious as a standalone card is very good to mill because it just gives you another body. And if you mill the Denier with it, like it becomes even better. Now Denier, frankly, is quite a brick in the hand. You don't really want to draw it, but that's the sort of the brick that I played for my combo to make Beatrice with the Dracosac. And overall, these were fantastic. Like, I would definitely recommend, if you want to play Tearlament at your locals, definitely try out the Malicious engine. I think that with Garura, sometimes you can even make a Beatrice to draw a card, so that's so good. And then the last cards are Nessies, Mothmans, and the Gammas. Let's talk about, so we can finish the engine first. The Nessies and the Mothmans, I thought were necessary. A lot of people have cut the dangers from their Tearlament lists, but I think versus, if you want to play an explosive deck that plays very well into those sort of rogue decks, right? Into Sprite. You know, maybe that's not even rogue anymore now, winning the YCS in London, but into many decks that they just get a lot of the bricks out of your hand, like Malicious, like Trivikama. This is a terrible card to draw. Like multiple Fenriers, stuff like that. Nessie also gives you level 7 on board for the Dracosac, and it's an Aqua Dark. Like, you can make a Roar with it, you can make Kaleido Heart with it. Nessie is just such a necessary card. What I also liked about these type of cards is that if you just put a lot of bodies on board with Malicious, with Nessie, with Mothman, you can actually break the Sprite board so easily with Underworld Goddess just by linking off their Sprite Sprint and 3 monsters that you control, and then it's basically an auto-win button. Just like back in the like 6 months ago when Tearlaments and the Sprite cards first came out. And it's something that I definitely wanted to keep to improve my win rate going second versus Sprite. And then obviously the only card to out the Riser is Gamma. If you lose a dice roll versus Castillo with this version, you definitely just pray to draw the Gamma. Otherwise, you just accept the loss if you go second. That's how it is. You know, that's the way Tearlament works right now. You can play more outs to Riser in your main deck. The issue is only that your matchups get a lot worse. So your everything that is not Kashtira becomes a lot more problematic. If you start playing Kaijus in the main deck, you also start breaking a lot more, which I always wanted to play. I thought it was more important to be able to play during this tournament. When it comes to the extra deck, it is pretty set now, but there's a lot of things that you can change. So Grapha, Rule Colors, Kaleido Heart, Garura, Mud Dragon, partly for Super Poly, but you also sometimes can make it in your combo with like Mothman or any of the other dark monsters. Dragostapelia, Guardian Chimera, D-Hero Dangerous, Redoer, Beatrice, Dracosac, Sprint, IP, Cherubini, and Underworld Goddess. Now, all of those cards I made during the weekend, so I think that none of those are cuttable in this version. But if you are going forward, you might want to cut the Fenrir with the field spells and maybe the Denier or something that you can start cutting the Dracosac with the Cherubini. Because one thing that I found was that if you make Lambda, if you play Lambda, it is first of all going second, very nice if you have the Gamma sitting dead in your hand. It plays very nicely into boards, but also if you go first, you can make the Redoer under the Lambda, banish it, and search the Gamma in the end phase to give you more interruption. I think that's a very neat play that sometimes comes up, especially if you make like Sheeran, Rhino Heart into Redoer. That's a very common play. And I also think that the Black Luster Soldier link was always decent in testing. I didn't miss it during the event, but versus Runic sometimes, which I didn't face a single one, this was a very decent card overall in testing versus that deck. And then for the side deck, you just play 8 Kaijus versus the Rysart. If you go second, you just want to draw this. If they open Shifter plus a Rysart, you have to hope to draw Gamma and Kaiju. That's the game. You just kind of have to hope for it. It worked one time during the tournament, won me a match. And then Super Poly versus Sprite, just to make that matchup going second just a little bit easier. And then 3 Cosmic, because I was definitely scared of Runic a bit more shortly before the event. I thought a lot of people were going to be on Runic, which ended up being true. But, you know, the Cosmics only went in versus my 1 Labyrinth match, and in that matchup I didn't even draw it. And then the Coldplay versus Shifter. I drew it once, yeah, it definitely won me a game outing the Shifter, which was decent. Yeah, it was decent. Did what it was supposed to do. So you cannot afford to get shifted with this deck at all. You basically end on nothing. Let's talk about some other engines that I thought were considerable for this event. I started playing the deck with Shaddolls, right? Shaddol Fusion, Shaddol Beast, Squamata, and also the one that mills, depending on the attributes. Those cards also just lose to a Rise Out, and they're bricks in your hand, so that's why I stopped playing them. The Beast can be decent. I wanted to fit it in the deck even until last second, but you cannot afford to play the Beast right now with the format. A Rise Out is a problem, and you need to maximize the amount of cards, the amount of starters in your hand. So even post-siding, if you side a lot of Kaijus, you will sometimes face the issue that you don't have a playable hand. Because in Tearlament, obviously a lot of combos that you have are maybe 2 to 3 card combos. A lot of them work interchangeably, but you have to have 2 to 3 cards. So I wanted to have more starters in my deck, and the Beast didn't really make it. Obviously, if we look at the deck list, we can also see that DPE and Fusion Destiny, you know, they're an obvious pick, right? You can put the Fusion Destiny just in there. You already play the targets with Deny and Malicious, and just throw it at the end, or maybe as a type of, you know, last card going second. It wasn't good enough for me. I wanted more cards that extend the game state. This also sort of had the same issue as the Kashtira engine, where I felt like it just put an interruption on board, but didn't really do anything else. Let's talk about the Rescue engine. The Rescue Ace engine is usually 3 Impulse with 1 Fire attacker. So the Impulse has an effect where when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, you can tribute this card from your hand or face-up field. So even going second, this works. And you special summon a Rescue Ace monster from your deck. So basically your opponent special summons Blue, they special summon Hugin, they special summon, or they normal summon Aluba, or special summon Unicorn, use the effect. You chain this Impulse. As Chain Link 2, you summon out the Fire attacker, which this says if a card is added to your opponent's hand, you can draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card. So this works versus almost every deck going second. This brick basically enables a lot of stuff where you draw 2 cards, you discard 1, maybe you discard a Miller, or you discard a Tearcash, you have another Tearcash in hand, then you don't have to go minus to activate the Tearcash in hand. So it can do a whole lot of stuff for you, and honestly, the ceiling with this is crazy. If you resolve this on a Sprite Blue, oh my god, the game is just over. You will make like 2 to 3 bodies on their first turn, and Sprite cannot deal with that at all. Versus Kashtira, it's not strong enough which is obviously the most problematic matchup, since the fusions that you put up versus Kashtira, they don't really bother the deck that much. They can still put up a Rise Out, even if you put up a Rule Colossus or a Grapha, something of that nature, if they open decently well. Like, of course, you can negate the Theosis with Rule Colossus, but the chances of them still being able to put up a Rise Out are too high. And then they just banish your stuff in the end phase with the Rise Out. So I thought that it was a very, very neat idea. I saw Herman Hansen play it on Dueling Book shortly before the event. He also tested Tearlament. And I was like, wow, like I was blown away by the effects. And I thought, oh my god, this is maybe the goo, you know? But ended up not being the case for me personally. Just ended up being a bit too bricky also. Because these cards are obviously not good draws with your dangers later on in the game. And with cards like Aurora, and they're also bad mills. So the big Kashtira engine was also something that you could think about. So you could play maybe a Unicorn, you could play a Birth, more field spells, maybe more Fenrir's. Like I said, the idea that I didn't like about it was that they were very bad mills. At that point, I can probably just play a Kashtira deck and not play the Tearlament cards, because they don't really interact that nicely with each other. And going second, a lot of the advantages, the explosiveness, you lose by playing those type of cards. Now, Destrudo in Ancient Fairy Dragon was obviously an idea that you can also play with in this deck in Tearlament, because Destrudo is a good mill, and it's a decent draw at least, right? You can discard it and it still gets all of its effects. If you can also special summon it from the hand, so it's not a brick. But the Ancient Fairy targets are not really that great in this deck. I feel like you can, of course, interchange the Perda Rhino with the Pressure Planet. You can think about maybe playing 1 Destrudo just to go into Baron with it, maybe. Because there are definitely, if you have a level 7 and a level 4 on board, the Destrudo makes it so it becomes level 3, and then you can, if you target the level 4, of course, and then you can go into Baron with the level 7, so a tier cash. So that's at least decent, but I didn't find the space for it. There are, of course, also Sprite variants with Nimble Angler. Nimble Angler is a great mill, but I found that the Sprite variants, they just have the issue that Sprite is inherently quite a streamlined combo deck. And with Tearlament, you definitely want, like I said, an explosive version that just that doesn't lock you into anything. And with the bodies that Nimble Angler provides, you can't really do that much. There were a lot of standalone cards that I also considered. Sephiroth, Foolish Goods, Tackle Crusader, we also already talked about. So Foolish Goods had the issue, it was not a good mill. Once again, Sephiroth was the issue that it was not a good enough draw. And to find the balance, that was the issue about the deck, right? A lot of those very strong cards, like Jet Synchron also, they're either too bad of a mill or too bad of a draw. Now that was the entire theory, more or less, over the last 3 weeks that I personally accumulated. Let me know what you think of this version of the deck, which you played at an event as well, and what is your current Tearlament version looking like if you play one. There are so many ways to build this deck, it's so interesting, and even after weeks it was still so much fun to, you know, test out certain engines and see if they work out. Other than that, I hope I see you in the next video very soon, and bye.